At this time, I want to introduce Heather Rasmussen, who will enlighten us about nutrition and brain health. Heather is the interim chair of the Department of Nutrition and Health Sciences, an associate professor, and a registered dietitian nutritionist, and has been at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln since 2018. She is also the director of the Professional Studies Program in UNL Dietetics Graduate Program, and is responsible for overseeing coursework and supervised experiential learning for students who are to become registered dietitian nutritionists. Prior to her current positions, Heather was faculty at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, where she served as a registered dietitian nutritionist and oversaw graduate student research in clinical nutrition. Heather has completed several human clinical trials investigating how dietary factors such as prebiotics and whole foods influence the gut environment, including microbiota, intestinal permeability, and gut-derived inflammation, and how this impacts systemic health. She has also developed several dietary screeners used by both researchers and clinicians to identify accordance to dietary patterns. I have known Heather since 1999, when Heather was a UNL dietetics student and worked with me when I was working in University Dining Service, University Housing. She worked with me until 2011. And she worked on different nutrition education programs and also other projects. At that time, I knew that Heather would excel in whatever she chose to do in the nutrition field, and boy, was I right. Heather is not only an excellent professor, educator, administrator, researcher, and leader, but she is also a role model for everyone for caring, kindness, and service to others. Heather's husband, Conan, is a great guy who absolutely writes the most creative, funny Christmas letters I've ever read in my life. And Heather and Conan are terrific parents to two little boys. Egan, who's in kindergarten and is in a bilingual school in Omaha, for half the day is taught in Spanish and half the day is taught in English. So by the time he's 7, he'll probably be fluent in Spanish and teaching his parents. And then his younger brother, Conley, is working on mastering reading, and I'm sure learning some Spanish from his older brother. I feel very fortunate to have stayed in touch with Heather for these 20-plus years. And we are so fortunate that Heather and Conan decided to move from Chicago back to Nebraska and be with us all. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who will talk to us about nutrition and brain health and dark chocolates.
Well, as expected, Pam was too nice, because that's who you are. So thank you, though. So I'm happy to be here. I will say I took some liberty, and so normally if I would do a presentation to, I'm going to say a lay audience, like, you know, it's a lot of practical information. I made an assumption that because of the group that everyone is very high functioning cognitively. Educated, so I'm going to actually show some like actual data. So hopefully that works for everybody. And I also had to narrow, like, this is super broad. So what's brain health? So I chose to talk about cognition and then easing into it like cardiovascular. But, you know, we could have talked about, you know, cancer. We could have talked about epilepsy or Parkinson's disease. So I'm just choosing a narrow path. But it's interesting because I'm talking mostly about a diet pattern that is popular these days. Okay, so this shows you the path as we age, and not to scare everybody, and I feel like I'm in this path as well, is that there's normal cognitive decline during aging for everyone. So that's the green on top. And then some individuals then unfortunately go through a path where they have mild cognitive impairment, which may then lead to dementia. And so there's descriptions of these at each stage. I'm not here to educate you in that. Some of you know some of this already. But just what I'm talking about today is related to mild cognitive impairment. And then one form of dementia we talked about was related to some of the changes with Alzheimer's disease. And so just, again, to tell you that it's, even within dementia, it's broad. So we talk about, a lot of times we think about dementia, we think Alzheimer's disease, which is, a hallmark is specific plaques, amyloid plaques. And then there's several other kinds of dementia. So if you look at the third, Lewy body dementia, Lewy bodies we think about Parkinson's disease. So we think about Parkinson's and motor disorders, but there's actually a cognitive component with some individuals. And then importantly, vascular dementia too. And so nutrition is really tied to vascular health. And so we think about hypertension, we think about cardiovascular disease, all of that kind of funnels in, to, or related to your vascular health. And so that can potentially increase risk for dementia as well, which is why I'm going to talk about the Mediterranean diet first, because there's evidence for cardiovascular. So lots of factors that lead to dementia. Diet is one piece, right? We pretend like it's the magic solution for everything, but it's not. So there's lots of pieces that are involved, but it is important. So again, vascular is part of that, but also, and then related to that is inflammation. You hear about that all the time. It's not just for cognitive impairment, cardiovascular, diabetes, many chronic diseases. So that's a key factor when we think about the foods I'm going to talk about, because it's related to their mechanism. So I think I have 30 minutes. So if I have about 20 slides. So if I'm going behind, I'll speed up a little bit. So again, I chose to give you more details about some of this, because I figure some of you have some experience or know about research. And so I'm mostly just going to talk about trials, just explain the general what it was and what they found. And we talk about clinical trials, right? Because randomized clinical trials, and controlled, because that's so much more powerful than saying they ate this and we also see they have good cognitive function, just assessing it at one point in time. So it's interventions to see if cognition changes in this case. So I'll just touch on a couple of them. DASH trials, PREDIMED trial, and related to the MIND trial. So has anybody heard of the MIND diet? Okay, so this is what is kind of a hot diet these days. And so I'm going to make sure you understand what that is and should you follow it, basically, for cognition. The three down here I'm not going to talk about, because there's not time. But so basically, I won't tell you what I'm going to say. I don't want to tell you my conclusion yet. But there's more studies that are happening, and these are trials with people enrolled related to diet, related to healthy lifestyle and cognition. So there's FINGER study, the US Pointer study, which is the US version of that, which is a lifestyle focus, and then Nourish, which it's about stroke, but it's a MIND diet too. So they're all kind of related. So lots of studies going on. In about a year, maybe I would tell you something different. I don't know. More evidence comes out. Okay. So has anybody heard of the DASH diet? Okay, that's probably common, if you go to the doctor, I don't know, maybe not, but I don't know how much your doctor talks about diet, but maybe. And so this is a diet that we talk about quite a bit for heart health, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So if you have high blood pressure, that may be something you hear about. And basically what it is, it's similar to other dietary patterns, high vegetables, fruit, low in sweets, basically your healthful dietary pattern. There's a focus on low-fat dairy as well. And basically this is just showing you, you can see which is the healthy one when you look at the broccoli versus the French fries. But this is the blood pressure. And this is the difference between the DASH diet, which is the broccoli, and then the not DASH diet in this trial, which is the French fries. So you can see the difference in blood pressure over time between the two groups, and then also over time with a lower sodium. So when you think about cognition, we think about vascular functions, we think about hypertension. So we think about a healthy dietary pattern, and then also a lower sodium diet, which I know you have all heard about, is the low sodium diet. But blood pressure is just a surrogate outcome, right? So it's not like cardiovascular disease, death. It's just, a risk factor, but it's important. So a study that has hard outcomes is the PREDIMED study, and this is a study with the Mediterranean diet. So I'm pretty sure everybody in here has heard of the Mediterranean diet. Does anybody feel confident that they know what it is? I think there's some nutrition people back there that probably are confident. I can talk about that. But basically, the study was intervention. A bunch of people had risk factors, hypertension, lipid, have high cholesterol, higher weight, and then they got randomized. They actually physically given olive oil, so it's a key component of the Mediterranean diet, or they were given nuts, which is also a key component of the Mediterranean diet, or they were on a control diet. So already we know from this short bit here that, well, you don't know yet, but olive oil and nuts are good things to eat in your diet. So take-home message. And so they're randomized, and then over time they looked at cardiovascular outcomes. So here is a pyramid. I know we've moved away from a pyramid. If anybody's seen, we're now in the plate era, so it's my plate, so it's like your sections of vegetables and fruits and grains. But this is a nice one. So a pyramid showing the bottom being what you should eat in a Mediterranean diet, up at the top, less. So again, it's the normal, mostly key players. Whole grains, beans, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. And then the Mediterranean diet is a little bit, we try to separate them out. Fish is one that is emphasized, and we think about cognition, and I'll get there. But fish has fatty acids that can be good for brain health. So I will say fish would be a good one to add if you don't currently consume it. And then low in saturated fat, lots of healthy fat, which is mostly the olive oil, less processed foods, no salt restriction, but not promoted, obviously. And then, as with everything else, physically active, or you're socially engaged, everyone here I feel like is socially engaged because you're here, you're taking those steps. So that's really important as well, also for cognition. So that's the gist of a Mediterranean diet. And for this study, they gave them the olive oil and the nuts. And basically, this just shows you that it's just a diet score. So basically, the group on top, which is the Mediterranean diet, both groups together, followed a Mediterranean diet more than the other groups did. So they did what they were supposed to do. And then outcome, 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease, events, and death when you look at the Mediterranean groups versus the control group. So that's a lot. And so it's important because this is a hard outcome, right? Death is a pretty hard outcome. So that's important, and that's not always studied in research because it's really hard to do and expensive. And then also they gave foods. So if maybe some of you have been in a study, you're more likely to do something if they physically provide you that thing they want you to do, right? And so that was also helpful, giving them olive oil nuts. And there was also a study in the United States more recently that showed benefit to atherosclerosis, so like plaque in the arteries, with a Mediterranean diet. So if you have any questions about should I follow a Mediterranean diet or not follow a Mediterranean diet, then I would say this is the most studied diet and which means most evidence for benefit. And that is also related to cognition, although the next study, the diet I'll talk about, is more specific for it. So because of that evidence, just another resource for you if you haven't seen it. There's a link here, which I don't know if you'll get my slides, but Life's Essential 8, just put it in. It's basically from the Heart Association, and it focuses on DASH diet or Mediterranean pattern. Either one, they talk about it a little differently, but either one is a good option. Being physically active, and not smoking, and then making sure you get enough sleep. So these are some key health behaviors that we would do for cardiovascular health, which relates to cognitive health. And then health factors, just thinking about, as you all, body weight, lipids, glucose, and also blood pressure. So we want to make sure those are in line. Okay, so let's narrow it down to cognition. So here's direct evidence. And I say that because some of it's just associations, so it's sort of direct. Okay, so I just want to spend a couple minutes. So the MIND diet, and this is, again, my key focus, stands for Mediterranean-Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So MIND is obviously easier to say. So why this is a thing that you may have heard about is because there's a couple people, and it just happens to be people that I've worked with. So they were both at Rush Medical Center. One is Martha Claire Morris, who unfortunately has passed away since then, 5 years ago. But Christy Tangney, who is a close colleague and friend of mine, who's amazing, they worked together on this MIND diet, and they are the ones that started the trial, which I'll talk about. So basically, how is a MIND diet different than a Mediterranean? Because sometimes I think even as a dietitian, I'm like, they kind of all run together. But there's little nuances that, we do pay attention to. So this diet separates out types of vegetables and types of fruit, in that leafy greens are emphasized a little bit more than other vegetables. That's all important. But leafy greens gets its own special category. Same thing with berries. Berries gets its own special category when we say, are you following it or not? So berries, yes or no. Fruit, yes or no. And then fish is included. So think about that. Good fats for brain health. Dairy's not as emphasized as much as like the DASH or the Mediterranean, and then wine is not emphasized. So I didn't mention the Mediterranean historically has a wine, not wine focus, but it's part of like what people would do in the Mediterranean, and so it was part of it, but I would say it's not for this. So basically, it's very similar, it just has some, again, these nuances. And then, so they've studied this just observationally. So here's one of the articles and the results. So they looked at a bunch of people that were in the Chicago area. They assessed diet, and they assessed cognitive status. And then they looked at the comparison. And so when they looked at it, they calculated a MIND score. So basically, if there was a higher MIND score in this, I don't know if this works, here, then there was a 53% reduction in this mild cognitive impairment. And then, sorry, that was a different study, of Alzheimer's disease. So they didn't intervene, eat a diet. Those people didn't get Alzheimer's disease. It was just a cross-sectional association. And then if the score was a little bit lower, but still partially they met it, then there was a 35% risk reduction. So this was kind of like kicked off. There was a couple other studies in there, kicked off this like, oh, maybe this is good for cognition. So because of that, mostly Martha Claire moved forward and then wrote a grant to get this big trial funded. And so basically, there's lots of details. Generalities, basically 3-year study, people ate a MIND diet and mild weight loss. So a small restriction in calories or just a small restriction in calories. And looked at cognitive change over 3 years. So looked at cognitive decline, global cognition, brain imaging, biomarkers, and some other markers as well. So just like PredyMed, way over here, that they were given food. So the MIND group was given berries, given olive oil, and given nuts. So one thing to take away from this is that they've determined that these are the important things, the key food components that may be good for brain health. And so even though I'll tell you the results weren't as exciting as they wanted them to be, I think for you keying in on like, oh, maybe I should be eating some berries, olive oils, and nuts. I mean, that's a good message too. And so there's lots of specifics. I just wanted to give you the overview of like what the MIND diet, like what they were focusing on, so that you can take that home with you. So whole grains, and I won't walk through all this. Fish was important, at least one serving a week. Poultry, which I don't know, we've kind of gone back and forth because we developed a tool based off of this later, and we're like, poultry. So we can talk about that later. I don't know if we'll have time, but I would say that's not as important. Extra virgin olive oil being an important piece. Dark green leafy vegetables. And so if you only are familiar with spinach, no, there's lots of other options. Other vegetables, which is also important, but just not separated out. Nuts are really important. Berries, again, separated out. Beans in the good. And then things to avoid. Red meat and processed meat. We could debate about probably red meat a little bit, but probably don't have time for that either. Butter or stick margarine, cheese, pastries, fried and fast foods. So you probably say, well, that seems like what I always hear. It's pretty close to what you would hear, like eat a healthy diet, just with some of the nuances. And so just here's some results. So pretty impressive that if you look at the weight change over there, that both groups lost weight. So if anybody has ever tried to lose weight, it's hard, really hard. And so it's impressive that over the 3 years, people didn't gain that weight. Because usually if you do if there's a trial, the weight goes down, and then about a year or so, then it plateaus and maybe even goes back up. So that was really impressive. That really tight intervention. And then people that followed the MIND diet did have a higher MIND score. And then, but this is the one thing I'll show you, but I can verbalize the others, is that this in the colored is cognition, just by a global cognition score. So their overall was that, we didn't see a difference between the cognitive scores with the control and the MIND group. So, and they also did the imaging, and they didn't see differences in white matter either. It could have been there's lots of things. It could have been like the control group did improve. They also lost weight. That could have been a confounder. So, lots of things could happen. This is research, as some of you know. You want this thing to happen, and then this thing happens over here. But some takeaways. Importantly, they both cognition got better. So think about also weight management when you're thinking about health, depending on where you're at. And so brain imaging is similar. People they were good, adhered well to the MIND diet. They both lost weight. This was during the pandemic, so there could have been some issues like pre-pandemic versus post and some of that. So maybe they thought that was part of the maybe reduce the positive effect. But, so, and I'm not here to sell, I make no profit off of this, just so you know that if you're interested in the MIND diet, aside from Googling, then there's a book that came out in 2015, and this book came out in 2022, and this was written mostly by her daughter and then the RD, Jennifer Ventrelli, for the MIND diet. So they're great people, reputable, I would trust the book, which is really hard because I don't ever buy diet books, because I don't have time to read them, but I don't trust either, generally, what is said. And so it says, a scientifically based program to lose weight and prevent Alzheimer's disease. So I guess what I like about it is that they're recognizing that at least their trial, there was some sustained weight loss. So I don't know, it might be worth checking out if you're interested in the dietary pattern. So one of the things with some of the other studies going on with cognition is that it's not just about diet, it's about diet and physical activity and cognitive and social stimulation, as I mentioned. So diet is one piece of the puzzle. And so up to 40% of global dementia cases could be prevented or delayed by targeting modifiable risk factors. Granted, at least 60% out there, but still, there's lots that we can do to help that. And then maybe all that together can be impactful. And so that's why the finger study and the pointer trials are looking at all those pieces together to see that impact. And I have other diet and brain trials also ongoing. So if we want to open the box of, all the things we talk about, like ketogenic diet, there's a ketogenic diet study. There's more MIND studies. There's some new research with microbiome and cognition. That's more at the animal stage. So this is a narrow view, because this is, to me, what is most talked about right now, and the trial was a really big trial that came out. But there's going to be lots more out there. Give it a couple years and then we can check again and see what the evidence says. I do have just a couple more slides. Because I think also, we say, okay, I know I need to follow a dietary pattern. Maybe the Mayan diet is helpful. Granted, we need more studies. But it sounds like a great idea, right? And I can target berries, I can target fruit. But what about nutrients? We've kind of moved a little bit away from nutrients, but they're still important, right? So it's why food is what it is. It makes it healthy. So here's some things that may be beneficial. So one of the reasons the Mayan diet was the way it is because some evidence on vitamin E and cognition, DHA, omega-3, which is a type of fat, if you're not familiar with that. Then also carotenoids too. So you think about all those in leafy greens have those. And then if we look at polyphenols and flavonoids, those are heavy in what you can see here: fruits, some vegetables, coffee, tea, dark chocolate, Pam. So you were right, and I think it's healthy. I have my kids put dark chocolate in their oatmeal, and they love it. So they get fiber from the oatmeal, and they get some polyphenols from the chocolate. And then, so there's also a trial. So there was a trial that did multivitamin, multimineral, and then also with cocoa. And it did show the multivitamin, it was Centrum Silver, there was some benefit on cognitive, and that was just the global score. It wasn't Alzheimer's as the outcome. So there was potential there as well. But I say, few trials of single supplements have provided convincing repeated or sustained evidence of cognitive benefit. So the message is not to go out and take a mega dose of vitamin E. It's to say, okay, so maybe taking that multivitamin, as I assume most of you are, because I generally take one if I remember. Just it's nice to have, and so having the dose a reasonable dose. That's to me my big thing, is not being crazy about it, which I allude to here. Optimal amounts of nutrients is important. So if you know what RDAs are, dietary guidelines, more is not necessarily better. We've seen that with certain vitamins and cancer outcomes, so mega doses aren't really what we're looking for. There's lots of misinformation about the supplements, and then vitamins and minerals found in foods are safest and best. So it's better to think about, how do I get my vitamin E? How do I get my vitamin C? How do I do all that from eating a healthful, well-balanced diet? Which I know is a boring message, but that's still, to me, where the evidence is. Okay, I could have said a lot more, but I know that was my charge was to not talk to you for an hour. So what questions do you have? Okay.
There's a lot of information. So if you were recommending to someone where to start,
Yeah.
where would you, the practical part, where would you recommend? How would you recommend?
Well, one, you could talk to your registered dietitian, and he or she could help you. But that would be very practical. They would do a practical approach. So it's okay, so what are you currently eating? All right, it looks like if you know your vegetable intake's, pretty low. Are you getting 3 to 5 servings? It's hard. So either work about small changes, I guess I would say too. So you're pick 2 things you want to work on. So maybe it's eating some leafy greens. Maybe it's eating some berries in the morning with your oatmeal. If you do oatmeal every day, add berries to it, things like that. So to me, it's really that practical stuff, and get it to be a habit and not, I don't know if you're routine eaters. I feel as we age, we become a little more routine. I don't know if that's true with you. So maybe just make sure you can work in a couple of things here and there. I think also thinking about cocoa, right? I do believe it's healthy. Do I take a supplement? No. Do you need to eat a lot of dark chocolate to really like get that amount? Maybe. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't eat it. But like sometimes I'll put cocoa powder in my oatmeal. I mean, things like that. I mean, I think that's perfectly acceptable. So it is bitter, but small amounts.
Can you address a little bit about the groups that were in the tests in the research groups? Were they their age, their culture, their backgrounds?
Yes, which is a big limitation, right? It can be a big limitation. So the MIND trial was mostly white. I think it was like 10% African American. And it was 65 and older. I know I sound confident. I think we shared 65 and older. And they had normal cognition, but had a close family like degree of like relative with Alzheimer's, with mild cognitive impairment. So they were, which I think when you think about it, you're like, well, that doesn't mean that person's going to be cognitively impaired, right? So it's risky to do that. And there was 300 in each group. I'd have to look back to see like, what if that, we saw the cognition change, which was good, but I don't know if anybody during those 3 years was like, oh, now they have dementia. I didn't see that in the paper. So in that study, then it was older adults, categorized as older adults. And then even like the PreDiMed study too, it was high risk people to get cardiovascular disease. Because otherwise you're never going to see anything because no one's ever going to get a disease. So it has to be high risk or older adults, depending what you're looking at. So good question, though. I didn't talk about that. There's a microphone. Yeah, microphone.
Probiotics are a hot topic now. How many
Yes.
of them actually survive the trip through the stomach?
That's a very good question. And I couldn't give you a percent, but I think you make a good point. So probiotics are live bacteria that you can eat, then may improve your gut health. That's a whole separate topic, which we can talk about sometime, but not all of them. I would say, again, separate thing, I don't take a probiotic. I think it's really helpful for some people. I don't take one. I'm more on the prebiotic path, which means fiber. We all know about fiber. So specific fibers, variety of fibers, fiber from your foods, maybe even fiber from supplements. So, but yes, it's a good point. It's not a universal recommendation for sure. Yes.
There's a tremendous amount of advertising about all these supplements.
I know.
Is there any reason to take any of them?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. So lots of advertising about taking supplements. Should we take any of them? Which it's hard to answer. I would say generally, I would never take over, if it's a standard nutrient, over the RDA, right, or the AI, whatever that number is. So if you look on the bottle, you don't want to get 1,000% of anything. Mostly, when you age, B12 is one that becomes a problem. As you know these things probably. Vitamin D also. So you may have to take a higher percentage of that. But recommendation is you do testing to see what your vitamin D is before you megadose vitamin D, right? I'm trying to think what else would be unique. I mean, it's important to get them to reach the recommended levels, but I tend to be one who's, I would say no most of the time. But I think a multivitamin is a good approach. Even though I feel like as you age, our diets, I'm sure you all eat healthfully at this point, right? So you probably get a lot from your diet. Okay, Vicky's in charge here.
Heather, thanks for sharing your information and knowledge with us today. Could you make I've read a little bit in the popular press recently about ketogenic diets and impacts on mental health issues like bipolar disorders. Do you have any thoughts about diet related to mental health?
Very good question. I looked into it's been a little while, like an anti-inflammatory diet for mental health, and it seemed a little uncertain. But if you think about what that would be, it would probably be a Mediterranean mind type of diet anyway. So we should probably follow those anyway. The ketogenic diet is really interesting, and I was going to put a slide on it, but I figured that was too far. And I can talk about that at some point too, because that's really cool. We used to do some work with patients with epilepsy, and it's effective for some people to reduce seizures. But there's tons of research right now about the effectiveness of ketogenic diet. Ketogenic for mental health disorders, I mean, I think there's some, but it's a hard diet to follow. So you'd really have to have a committed person, if it's not your patient, to be able to follow it to the level that would make a difference, to get the fat up so high and others so low that you're in ketosis. Okay.
Some years ago, there was a book published that by the title, I think, of Hard Tomatoes, Hard Times. And
I don't know that one.
it had to do with the way we do agricultural production, basically, of fruits and vegetables. Yeah. I'm a plant breeder by training, and it really spoke to me because the book's title was taken from the reality that tomato varieties are selected not for flavor, not for nutritional value, but how tough they are to pick and ship 2,000 miles, sometimes with and without refrigeration. And I've been fortunate enough to go to Europe and other parts of the world and eat, fresh foods from their farmers markets and one thing and another. And I just marvel at the difference in flavor and texture. Yeah. And I've always wondered if it's a nutritional thing as well, the difference between our varieties and the way we choose them and theirs. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's been a comparison between like tomatoes in America versus tomatoes in Europe or something, but I think it's logical, and I've seen a little bit on it, but not a lot, but to say that tomato I get from the store that's barely red, that I am still using at that stage, and it's hard, versus what you get from a garden. That, I mean, I don't know if we all garden, I assume we all garden for some reason, but there has to be a difference, I say as a non-evidence statement, based on even what you see, right? If you think about berries are great, how red and purple they are, then that's the anthocyanins. So you're going to have more lycopene, for example, in those than what you get at the store. So I fully agree. And it's hard enough to get people to eat vegetables, let alone be like, now you have to grow them. Or move to Europe or something. But so that is I would say the ideal is to be really selective about the types of fruits and vegetables where you get them.
Oh, okay, I had a question. There may or may not have been an effect on dementia, but following that kind of a diet, were there other types of positive things? For example, I'm thinking of the things they were eating might not that be good for heart health, diabetes, things related to, like, obviously did find out weight control, bone health, and so on, which still makes it a reason to aspire to that type of diet or components of it, even if it didn't help in dementia.
Yeah, very good point. And they did look at some of those markers of how that we think about for health, and there was some improvements in those. So, yes, I mean, it's not just that. And if you think about it, it's 3 years sounds like a long time, but it's not that long when you're looking at outcomes. So think about maybe 2 more years, or maybe lifetime, and then those markers related to cardiovascular health, which then impacts vascular function and cognition. So, yeah, and we're not, I wouldn't just throw the study out like, oh, we don't need to follow, we don't need to eat our greens and stuff. So I think that's a really good point, is that what are all these other outcomes that are likely affected by that, and not just that one cognitive marker. So.
Well, because I was thinking too, I was having a conversation with somebody recently. They said, well, I can take a pill to lower a certain blood factor,
Yeah.
And so why should I bother with diet? And I thought, well, there are still other things that diet will help you with, even if it doesn't help with that. So I'm just wondering if it's the same with this. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just because you said that, that's just an important point, is like I tell my students is, someone may come to you and say, well, I'm taking a statin, so my cholesterol went down, so I don't need to worry about my diet. Well, that's not true, because there's so many, all those foods that could help you lower your cholesterol. It's not just about your LDL cholesterol, right? There's so many things they can do to reduce risk. So, yeah, don't ever think a pill is in place of a diet. It's a synergistic
I just
focus.
remember your very first slide, or sort of, when you compared French fries to broccoli.
Oh, yeah. I didn't create that slide, but.
Well, I'm just saying that, hey, vegan diets are good for you, right?
Well, I know that it's because of your background that you're not, not that you're not being sincere, but yes, that is also a good point, is that, and that's why, I was thinking about red meat. It's like, there's nothing, I wouldn't lump red meat in with necessarily something you should never eat. And being a vegan or vegetarian is great, but you can do it still very poorly. So it's the types of foods you pick, that's important as well.
Yeah, I'm a microbiologist, and the fungus that I work with excretes a small molecule called farnesol, and I've recently found out, looking at the literature and trying to write a review on the subject, that it's a hot topic in both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and it is called a miracle drug by certain people who've published on it, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier. You can't take it as a supplement, but it might have something to do with the long-term causes of these neurodegenerative diseases. Have you heard of it? Can you confirm that that it is a worthwhile topic of research, or?
I cannot, because I have not heard of it. There's so many things I will say that's probably apparent. Is I don't know. There's so many things I don't know about medications for every condition or new and upcoming drugs. Like, we do some of that, I don't do it, but other people in my department do some of that small molecule, like the targeting for certain conditions, some genetic conditions, and it's a big wide world of that. So, but it sounds like you're in a really good area, and that there's benefit.
My question is about advice. I've been to several doctors, a variety of ailments, and I invariably ask about the diet, and I invariably get no. Diet won't make a difference. No, we don't have any diets. What's your advice? The only thing is
Get a different healthcare provider.
Is it?
I'm kidding. I'm sure they're very capable. They are.
But it's so frustrating. So the choice is, is it because of my age, or is it a direct invitation to the internet? And like you say, which diet? I don't know. Any advice?
Yeah. I think, let me just, I try to look at everything, step back. Again, it's not just about diet, right? There's so many, you can eat a great diet, and then if you don't get off the couch and you don't talk to people, and I'm not saying that's you, but just, there's limitations. So I see the perception, if you've already gone down this road so far, I can think of several family members where I'm like, well, at this point, I'm not going to push this, this, and this, because that's not going to be important at this point. But I don't think that's a general approach for overall. No. You can still make it different. So the one study, not the PreDimed, the second cardiovascular in the United States, was secondary prevention, which means they already had heart disease. Can we prevent another heart event? And then show that it was beneficial, and that the outcome was plaque. But so it doesn't, not a lost cause, you or anybody else. It's still important. It's not a miracle, but it's still important. So
The issue about a bacteria mentioned associated with mental whatever. Something that crossed my path this morning was listeria, and actually it wasn't. It was about the date, expiration date on cheese and whether or not it had mold. And there are very, 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 very few cheese molds that hurt you. There are some, but there are very few. But listeria, you can't see it,
Yeah.
and it will kill you. But if you cook it, it's a dead dude.
Yeah. I mean, those, yeah, important things. And I always wondered, like, for pregnancy, like we say, don't eat these cheeses and don't eat deli meat. And someone else in this room has more knowledge of this than I do, I'm sure. But then we're like, oh, we can eat lettuce and avocados and other things that may have these. I think it's just a message of like, we probably shouldn't say to not eat vegetables so I feel like it's a selective approach on the recommendations. But yes, food safety, definitely a food problem.
You can find it probably on the dirt list.
Yeah.
It's very, very common.
So my kids shouldn't eat the food they drop on the floor. Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. It is serious. I don't mean to make light of it, but is there anything else? I know that we are
Just one quick
over time.
question.
Yeah.
Speaking of kids, probably a lot of you are grandparents. These diets, is there anything wrong they're good for everybody? So
They are, yes. And, like cardiovascular disease, like that formation and the artery, plaque starts in childhood, right? So it can. So year one, it's good to focus on that. We fed our 7-year-old arugula, pureed arugula, and when he was 8 months old, and that did not go well, as you might notice. So we try, like the leafy greens. I guess the only thing I would say is like protein, making sure they get good protein, which is why like meat, they do recommend having high iron and meat sources when kids are little. But I mean, round that out with beans and veggies and all these things that if you set the preferences early, then they'll like them more in adulthood. Okay.
Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you.